Willem Olivier, the CEO of Resilient Innovations, joins us for this episode of What's Next. Willem, interesting. So, Resilient Innovations, tell us a little bit about yourself and your company. How did you guys get to where you are today?
Okay. Yeah, so I've been in the business continuity industry for about 24 years now. I worked for a company called Continuity SA, and Continuity SA was acquired by Dimension Data in 2014. And in 2021, DD decided to divest from quite a number of organizations because these organizations didn't fit the go-to-market strategy for NTT, who owns Dimension Data. And as you know, that in April this year, DD became NTT Data. But in that period since 2021 up to last year, the 1st of December 23, we were at Vision within Dimension Data. And so we had to pull out the division because that's what we did the management buyout with, and pulled it into a PTY limited company called the Resilient Innovations. Unfortunately, we couldn't take the Continuity SA brand with us. That's got to remain behind indeed for the legal purposes for in the future. But for us, it's a new brand, it's a new beginning, and we're excited about it. But we have over 30 years of experience, and I think that's important. The clients remain the same, the infrastructure remained the same, and we're actually expanding on some of our portfolio of services and partners that we have in the industry.
That's fantastic. Well, listen, I like what you said there. It's a new name, a new brand, but that experience is there, and that you cannot erase or change at all. You guys have got a big event coming up, the Radical Resiliency event. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, we have our own private cloud, which is based in Johannesburg, and it's with a backup as well in Randburg. And our biggest partner in that whole process is Vim, and we also make use of XGrid and VMware as products that support that. So we do backups for clients and provide backups, and the DRaaS, disaster recovery as a service to clients that don't want their data out of the country. And this is mainly government departments and a lot of organizations don't want to have data outside the country and they want to make sure, they want to physically see it, that it is in South Africa. So we've developed our own DRaaS facility with a backup facility along with that. And along with our partners, we are going to host this conference just to go to market with it and get the brand out there, get the services out there, and get people to understand what DRaaS and BaaS is all about.
Yes, well, listen, that's what I wanted to ask you. I mean, because you mentioned something very important over there with data, and where the data resides is a very important aspect for many organizations. It's got to reside in the country that you're in, and it's got all sorts of regulatory aspects to it. But you mentioned DRaaS, or disaster recovery as a service. It's big business today. I mean, we've seen a lot of organizations just recently taking a hit with regards to their security, etc. What exactly is disaster recovery as a service, and how does DRaaS work?
Okay, so basically what we do is we create an instance, a virtual instance for a client. And what we do there is a full application and systems and data replication into that environment. And as soon as something goes wrong in the production environment, the guys basically fail over, and depends on how much data and how quick they want to do it from an RTO, recovery time objective perspective, they can fail over their systems into our virtual environment and have immediately access to the data and carry on working as if nothing happened. There's quite a lot of automation in that process as well, but there are people monitoring that and working through that process all the time to make sure it's done properly.
Okay, so it's a very, very important part of the business. I mean, I just remember recently we had that, global CrowdStrike outage a few weeks ago, and many businesses were affected. So why would a business integrate this into their recovery plan, the disaster recovery as a service? Why do they need to integrate it into their business? And I guess, as you mentioned a second ago, it's all about the continuity, because downtime is critical. It's going to cost you millions, but I'm sure that's just one of the reasons.
Absolutely. So the main big thing is you've got to understand what your recovery time objective is on your data, and So if you're a call center that does outbound sales, your RTO might be a day or two. You don't really, you can switch off that service. But if you have a banking inbound client service,
Right.
then that's a critical thing, especially if it's a fraud line or somebody needs to call the bank. And then also for things like trading, if you do that, and then also payment systems and those things, they got to be up all the time and must be able to fail over within seconds. And that's where the disaster recovery service comes in, because you can fail that over fairly quickly, and they also have the data integrity to come through. But with things like CrowdStrike, it was obviously a version update that ran through quite a lot of systems, and the impact was on a lot of desktop equipment and some server equipment as well. What we do is we monitor those things all the time. We monitor them with companies like Veeam, and we run it as an N-1, meaning that we remain one version behind, and only when there's stability within, say, a day or two or three in the industry, that then we will roll over to the latest version. So we weren't impacted at all from any of our computer systems or our data center, purely because the way that we manage the environment. And that is a critical point. A lot of companies did fail. Not fail, their recovery failed because they couldn't switch it over. And unfortunately, on desktop computers, you obviously had to go and do a manual intervention per desktop. So that was quite a biggie. But in some environments, companies can do those kind of rollouts directly to those PCs. That's typically what we do in our environment. But I think for the DRaaS perspective, we were able to recover clients that had a problem.
So, Willem, you got DRaaS and backup as a service, right? Tell us a little bit about the two and how they go about enhancing work area and recovery and those production environments, because they are very different, aren't they?
Absolutely, yeah. So DRaaS is basically, like I mentioned earlier, the disaster recovery as a service that will bring your applications up with your data, and you then work in a virtual environment as if your own production environment is, for argument's sake, in another data center, in your own personal data center, which failed. Then you'll switch over to our DRaaS system, and you'll be able to have the data available. Backup as a service, we can't even delete that. Nobody can basically delete that information. Once you've backed it up into the BaaS, that's your final fallback. So even if you have been compromised in your production and that's pulled over into your DRaaS, and that's also compromised, and you have to now rebuild your whole environment, then your data is the critical component, because you can always rebuild wipe all of your servers, bring all of the systems back up in place, and then bring the data across back into your production environment. Now, the RTO on that is obviously, that depends on how many servers you have. It can be very complicated and can take a lot of time, but at least you have your data. Because if a company loses this data, that's the new gold today. It's a big issue. And recently I read an article where the guys were talking about saying that data in Africa that's the new gold. And that's why a lot of companies in Africa, or countries in Africa, are also opting to say that data mustn't go out of the country. They want that data sovereignty. We see that several countries. It's not necessarily the same in our private sector, but in some countries, it's even in the private sector as well.
So, Willem, at the end of the day, many companies are already backing up data and it's going to the cloud. We know how big the cloud is, whether you've got Azure, or whether it's Google or AWS, whatever it is. The backups are happening in the cloud. Is that not sufficient in the world that we're living in today?
In many cases, it is sufficient, and yes, there would be some DR. But what companies have to understand is that they tend to back up or have a DRaaS facility in place which has several terabytes of data. But if you decide to move from an AWS to a Google or Azure, for that matter, the egress of that data out of that environment into your own private cloud, if people want to have the data now locally on their own backup systems, that cost is immense. It's not a cheap thing to do, but on our side, there's no cost associated with it. The day that you want to egress your data from us, we don't charge our clients for that.
Yeah, interesting. So Willem, your product, does it sit over and above what companies are doing. So if I'm already backing up my data, your service that you guys provide is over and above that. Is that right?
Yeah. So a lot of companies, and it's interesting you mentioned that people do their own backups. I was quite recently at a function and we were talking about how guys in a bit large organization, some of them in the oil industry, they back up their data to a hard drive and then they put it in the car and take it home and they put it in their safe. And just to have a backup of the data to make sure. So for those kind of clients, we can definitely help them and to service, and they can replicate over the internet like that. In terms of the additional services, if a client, for instance, has their own little data center in their office in Johannesburg, wherever, and as we have seen, we've had a big client where there was a fire about 3 floors below them, and the building was quite badly damaged for 2-3 floors, and they didn't have any fire damage, but the cabling to exit the building in terms of data was all gone. And then there's the smoke and soot that raised up into the rest of the building contaminated the building. They couldn't even use the plastic telephones that's on the deck.
Sure.
Threw everything away. So effectively your production environment is then decimated. And for that we have work area recovery. That's where clients can then fail over all of their critical applications and critical processes, because those are the things that you've got to map out in your business impact assessment and to have continuity plans for those. So we can bring clients across into our recovery facility, set up their virtual environment for them, for their production, if their systems are with us as well, and then bring the data in, and then they can start to operate. Now, the recovery it depends on the type of, obviously, a recovery time objective, what type of organization you have. But in some instances, call centers like a roadside call center, for instance, a roadside assistance type call center, or emergency medical services, those guys can't be down long. It's got to be minutes. And most of the time, it's the time to travel from the other facility to our facility that takes the most time. But once we receive the invocation and we know what the service is, if the client has work recovery, DRaaS and BaaS in place, we know exactly what to do when there's an invocation. And by the time they get to the facility, their staff could normally walk in, sit down and work. It's a matter of minutes that we can do this.
Brilliant. Willem, that Radical Resilience event, just tell us again, when is it taking place? How do people register? And how do people get in touch with you guys at Resilient Innovations?
So we have, the event is on the 26th of September, and it's in Waterfall Corporate Campus at our head office. And on our website, ri.africa, there's a link where you can go to click on to go and register for the event. And there's also info@ri.africa that you can use and send an email and get in touch with us like that way. We have a team that looks after the information officer that comes in, and we'll call the people back or connect to the people that want to attend and register them.
Yeah. Okay. And who is the event aimed at? Is it CIOs, CTOs? I mean, who should be at that event?
I would say that chief security officers, chief information officers, chief technology officers, definitely those kind of C-level people. It's critical for them. People that also in the BCM and resilience industry, it's critical. I would say that banking, financial institutions, companies that support banks and financial institutions, those are the kind of companies that have to be able to come and join and listen and what it's all about. One thing I do want to note is that I also come from the banking industry, worked for multinationals for many years, set up recovery facilities in countries. But the one thing that's important is that banks request a recovery plan from their own suppliers and vendors. And the banks themselves have to obviously provide the South African Reserve Bank on an annual basis what their recovery resolution is about, how they're going to recover the bank, what goes wrong. And then part of that process is to vet all of their vendors and suppliers to make sure that the critical ones, that whole supply chain and logistic management is also, I would say, people that should attend an event like this.
Very, very interesting stuff. Willem Olivier, the CEO of Resilient Innovations, rebranded, but the same history and the same experience that they've got 30 years. RI.Africa, if you want some more details on that event, find out more about disaster recovery as a service and why it's important in your particular business. And of course, you can also find out about all of these trends and backup as a service and how critically important it is for your business and that business continuity. Willem Olivier, thank you very much for joining us for this episode of What's Next.
Okay, thank you very much for the time.